All right, it is Friday, March 19th, 2021, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today we're going to cover UFC 261 is a full capacity crowd event. What is the business rationale, the ramifications, the implications, all that fun stuff as to why we are getting a 3-title fight event with, full-on fans still while COVID is going around. We'll talk about what the promotion is thinking from a business perspective and dive into that a lot today. We're also going to talk about the Endeavor's IPO filing. So according to sources, Endeavor is going to try again in the IPO market. They've tried once before. We'll rehash some of that info, talk about if it makes sense for them to do it right now, post-COVID and all of that, and break that down as well. Lastly, we will also dive into the UFC's new deal with UPShow in terms of bringing UFC broadcasts to bars and restaurants. If you watch UFC pay-per-views at bars and restaurants, I'll break that down in terms of how it affects you and everything in between in terms of any differences or things you might notice with this new deal. So you got the timestamps below as always. Appreciate you guys bearing with me through the delay, and it'll probably be a shorter episode, but let's go ahead and dive right into it. So the first thing I want to dive into is UFC 261 being a full capacity crowd in Jacksonville, Florida on April 24th. So potentially 15,000 fans could be in the arena when Kamaru Usman fights Jorge Masvidal. And then the undercard features 2 other title fights with Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang. Pretty stacked card, especially on the main card. 3 title fights is a rarity. I know we just had it at UFC 259, but it's very rare you get 3 title fights on a card, let alone that close to another event that just happened, a little more than a month before. So before we dive into the business rationale and what Dana and the promotion is thinking with this, let's set the background context. You have several states that have opened up and lifted COVID restrictions. Most notably in the news is my state of Texas, where we just lifted pretty much everything. Businesses still have the right to enforce mask mandates or particular capacity rules if they wish. And this is, for U.S. Fans that don't know what's been lifted in particular states or international fans that haven't heard about this. Still pretty, fluid in terms of what a business can enforce versus what the state allows, but the state generally supersedes any local mandates, at least in Texas. So, if Austin's Bear wanted to put a mask mandate on the city, can't do that because the Texas governor's order supersedes that and it's maskless. So that all being said, September of 2020 is when Florida lifted their restrictions. They've been, ridiculed, praised. Their governor, Ron DeSantis, says, you pretty much either love him or hate him for his policy on COVID, but it's been pretty much a free and open state since September. And it's been up to businesses to make their own rules in terms of what people have to do. So it's not super shocking that the UFC has decided to go back there, especially because when you think about it, Florida was one of the first places that they held events when all of this went down with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So I know there would have been a lot of talk about Texas, and a lot of people were speculating Texas. Dana had showed interest in Texas, but it didn't pan out for whatever reason. So Florida it is in Jacksonville, where it's going to be a free-for-all in terms of what's required and not required. Now, a key point here is also Dana has been very, adamant about he doesn't want to wear a mask. He's not about that life. But in terms of what the UFC as a brand and a business may require, that's still up in the air. They might say, no, you have to wear a mask. It's possible that they do enforce that. Or they give guidelines that say, please wear a mask, but if you don't, we're not going to kick you out. Or, you please stay 6 feet apart, but if you don't, we're not going to kick you out. There's a lot of fluidity here in terms of the specifics on what rules will be in place and won't be in place. There's also, the time frame of what we've seen in terms of cases, right? Cases are going down for COVID in the U.S. pretty much everywhere. As vaccines have rolled out, I believe it's 105 million doses given out today, or maybe that was yesterday's number. Either way, vaccine doses are going out at a rapid pace. We've seen a lot of states moving up their vaccine schedule. So where a lot of healthy people thought they wouldn't get a shot until May or June, July, a lot of states are now saying April 5th or April 10th, anyone is eligible for a vaccine, or all, everyone over the age of 16. It shows you the impact vaccines have had on cases and hospitalizations and so forth. It really has been a dramatic effect, much more than people expected. It's more than I expected. It's more than, a lot of people who I know who are very smart that I consider, good friends who I would trust their opinion. They've been shocked by this, where the impact of the vaccines has made such a huge difference that by April 24th, it will be interesting to see what case numbers and deaths from COVID look like in the state of Florida. And the reason I bring that all up is that's part of the rationale here. This is part of why the UFC is doing this, right? Dana and the UFC were known as the sport that came back first in April of 2020, right? Everything had shut down, didn't have any major sports playing, and they rolled out this plan with, testing standards and safety precautions and all that. And they were known as the first sport back. And they got a bump from it. I've talked about this on previous episodes. The COVID bump that really has helped their numbers, specifically pay-per-view numbers for stars that maybe didn't have your normal drawing power, with a lot of the world locked down and not being able to go do the things they normally do and not being able to watch the sports they normally watch. UFC 249 was massive. It was a big boost in terms of, hey, this is finally live sports. We can watch this. And, again, around 800,000 pay-per-view buys when Gaethje and Ferguson were not really known to draw those numbers. At least those are the numbers we got. I will not go into my typical rant on pay-per-view numbers, but still, they clearly got a boost from the pandemic and being the first back. I think that brand image for them is a huge reason of why they're doing this. Is they move into, Florida and they do a full capacity crowd, they're going to be one of the first to do it. You have the ability in Florida, in Texas, in a couple other states to have basic live events pre-COVID, where it would go in, you feel like it's 2019 again, or early 2020, where, no masks, no even thought of anything. It's pre the world was changed. And a lot of sports organizations have decided not to opt for that, at least not right now. As vaccines roll out, as they look at ways of bringing in fans safely and looking at, reduced capacity crowds, we've seen that, right? We could bring 25% or up to 50%. You have fans kind of spaced out. We've seen that before, but a full crowd, no one's really taken that leap yet. Most likely because A, it goes against CDC guidelines and what a lot of health experts are recommending. And B, the ramifications of that, if it becomes a super spreader event, man, that's a big deal. So the UFC right now is basically weighed out. Do I want to be the first back with capacity seating and, help pump up that image of, yes, this is, we are the leaders in this space. We have done it again. We have innovated, and we are the first to have 15,000 fans in the stands and get that benefit. Does that benefit outweigh the risk of a news report a week later that says, yeah, turns out we did contact tracing and, UFC was a super spreader event, right? UFC 261 ends up being a massive super spreader event where hundreds get sick or something. That would be very bad for the promotion. And that's what a lot of other, sports and other organizations have looked at, is they've said, I don't know about this. You look at, the Sturgis motorcycle rally that went on pretty much, without a hitch and was basically treated as pre-COVID, and that broke out to be a super spreader event. There were hundreds of cases linked to that, and they got a microscope put under them. It's one thing if you've got a yearly event or something that's not going to go away, or it might hurt the brand a little bit, but it probably won't given the audience. It's another when you're talking about a global sports brand that's trying to continue its growth and eventually get to that level of the NFL, NBA, and all that. But at the same time, with vaccinations rolling out, with cases dropping dramatically, and this is still a month and some out, you've got to wonder if you're not thinking as the promotion, well, maybe this happens and it would suck, but maybe our odds are pretty good here. And maybe we should take this risk. How much does your brand get boosted by being first versus the potential of a PR nightmare with a super spreader event? And let me break each of those down for you. PR boosted from this. It helps solidify that brand, I think. And I think it helps solidify and connect with the core MMA fan, right? If a lot of MMA fans are very much of the mindset that, a lot of MMA fans, frankly, are of the mindset that COVID is a thing, but we still want to have the freedom to do whatever, right? I know swaths and swaths and swaths of MMA fans that want to have the ability to have it be their choice to go to an event without a mask and watch it. And if they get sick, okay, they get sick, but that's up to them. And that's a big core constituency of MMA and particularly UFC fans. There are plenty of fans that don't feel that way, but I would say the majority are probably of the mindset of, I want to be able to go to a live event and see my favorite fighters and not have to wear a mask or do any of that stuff, and whatever, it's my choice. Or maybe I want to go and wear a mask, but whatever, it's my choice. I want to do this. At least here in the US. That is the impression I've got. That is from talking with colleagues, from looking at UFC core demographics. You can easily see that the majority of fans tend to feel that way. So if they come out and the UFC says, yep, we're going to, put it on again. We're going to do this awesome event. Everybody's going to be here. It's going to be amazing. That helps, resonate with their target audience or their core audience, really. Target audience, I mean, partial target audience, right? But, definitely with their core audience, big time. And if they get to say, yes, we were the first and get that feather in their cap, that helps them in terms of their credibility, especially as they try and move forward to get to the NFL, NBA level, MLB level, all that. If they pull it off, it's a nice feather in their cap to say, yeah, okay, you guys did it. If they don't, well, it kind of falls into your typical MMA type of thing, right? And what I mean by that is this sport has plenty of instances or of situations that would be ludicrous in the MLB or NBA or anything of that nature, but we see commonplace in MMA, right? Dana White banning reporters or coming out and berating, fighters or certain things for that. You never see that in the NBA or MLB, right? You're not going to see Roger Goodell or, Adam Silver come out and be like, yeah, you're banned and you're a piece of trash, all that. No, but in the combat sports world, yes, it's a thing. It's a thing that happens. And, we've only seen that backlash really come down hard on the promotion when they banned Ariel Helwani for breaking the Brock Lesnar news and all that. But other than that, they really, they kind of just roll with a lot of the negative PR and criticism that they get for their decisions. The UFC in particular, they just kind of say, yeah, whatever, this is what we're doing. And so if you end up hosting UFC 261 and it becomes a super spreader event, they say, it's their choice. It's whatever. And it ends up being, kind of like Sturgis, right? Sturgis blew over. I'm sure a lot of people forgot that the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally was a super spreader event that was traced to a lot of cases. People got upset about it, but not to the extent where, again, people were like, oh, fine, all these bar owners, do all this stuff. At least not to the national level to where the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally brand is gone. I fully expect for them to do it this year and have it go off pretty much without a hitch and be like, yeah, whatever, we're doing it again. The UFC would probably do the same thing. They've had plenty of issues where, you've had their athletes like Connor pull things, or John Jones or whatever, and there's been some ramifications, but it's been okay, whatever. Or USADA tests and moving an event from Nevada to California within a week's time. Could you imagine that? Where it's like, hey, by the way, we're going to have a playoff game in Atlanta. And oh, no, you know what? A week later, we're going to actually switch to this because of, somebody failed a drug test. There are so many PR stories that apply to MMA and the UFC in particular that the UFC can now kind of just brush off that might be how they're viewing this. When you're looking at the risk of like, what happens if 500 cases of COVID are linked to this event, you're going to get a lot of, my guess is denial, saying, well, you can't really prove it came from that event necessarily, all that. Or, even if you could, well, yeah, it was their choice, but, we're working on it, blah, 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 and kind of just brush it under the rug. Will it really hurt the brand that much? Will it really hurt the promotion that much? You've got, look at the media right now. You've got some media coming out and saying, this is not what you should be doing. This is crazy. And you've got a lot of other media just not acknowledging it at all and just saying, okay, they're doing it. Wow, it's going to be the first event back. 3 title fights, going to be the first, the first event back. That's going to be crazy. That right there shows you, in terms of the combat sports world, the effect negative PR or potential negative PR has on a promotion like the UFC. It's just probably not there. So you weigh these cost benefits, and from a business perspective, right? Especially if I'm Dana White, where normally, I'm one of the first people to say this is a business cause. I am making a business decision here. It is 100% business for the UFC, regardless of what White says or what goes on in the background. They use data. They are a very strategic organization in the moves they make. And I will say 99 out of 100, that's the case. This may be one of the cases where they're still making a strategic decision here, but Dana's personal belief and the executives at the top's personal belief may also be a part of this. Where, especially with the whole media video that came out that's now since been pulled down and all of that, it's been clear that he doesn't want this to affect his business, his brand. That's part of the message he sends. And this is, again, reinforcing that message. And, it's not that the revenue right there. Let's also clear up something. It's not that the revenue you get from selling tickets to fans is huge, especially with the way the UFC has diversified their revenue distribution, all of that. It's not that they're hurting for money and this is going to alleviate that. It'll be a nice bonus, but it's not like we had to get fans and seats in order to, make our goals. That's not the case. It's much more about brand. What this is about is building and selling that brand of toughness, of resilience, of COVID's not going to stop us, and this is about freedom and all of that stuff. That's what this whole thing is about. And Dana and the other execs, personal beliefs might be influencing a little bit here, but even then, that's what they're banking this on. Is we pull off a 15,000 person event. Sure, you get a couple of COVID cases, but it's not a super spreader event. We can move past it. We start having live crowds again, and we are known as that resilient, tough, we care about the fans type of sport where no, we're not going to like screw COVID, scary COVID. What's that? No way. Like come sit your ass down and watch fights. It's about the brand image. That's what this whole thing is about. That's also why you got 3 title fights. It's to try and sell out. It's to get full capacity and help bolster that brand image. That's why else would they do Usman Masvidal so short notice, right? The whole thing that Masvidal has been talking about has been, oh, if I had a full camp, I'd beat Kamaru Usman. You're not getting a full camp if you're moving right now, right? You got, as of today, you've got maybe 30 some days. You're not getting a full camp. So why throw this all together so quickly? Why not, give it more time to be hyped up? It's, again, to be the first promotion back with fans and to build that brand image. That's the end goal of this. That's what I truly believe is the end goal of this. Because being first in business, anything about business, being first is a big deal for a lot of reasons. In this case, again, it's not like they're going to get more fans from other promotions that are going to stop going to, say, Bellator shows or PFL shows or what have you. No, that's not the case. And it's not like you can sell tickets at a super high price either. But it's more about the perception of their brand, and that's why they're doing this. And they've gone through and weighed the cost benefits, and they've seen, yep, PR, okay. Because I would also pretty much guarantee in terms of liability, right? Because there's still a lot of gray area in terms of COVID liability. I'm assuming that somewhere in where you buy the tickets, you're signing a COVID-19 liability waiver that essentially says like, yep, you may get COVID if you come to this event. Now, the interesting thing here will be if somebody comes to the event, gets COVID, and then ends up giving their relative COVID that maybe they live with, or maybe they visit or whatever, and then that relative dies or gets really sick and has medical costs and bills, as we've talked about in our interview with Dan Lust at the beginning of the year, the beginning of last year, when all this craziness happened with coronavirus, the legal ramifications of that are very much in flux. That was part of the UFC coming back in the first place. It's one thing to have your independent contractor, some people sign waivers and say, I'm going to kind of smaller cohort of people in the building while you're doing this. But now you're bringing in all these fans. Who knows what could happen? You could see a lawsuit. It's possible. But I would also imagine, again, the UFC is probably looking at this. The legal team has definitely thought this out and has, ran through what they need to do to protect themselves. I do not believe that the UFC legal team is just sleeping on something like this. So my guess is you're signing a COVID-19 liability waiver, and you are essentially waiving your rights as well as the rights of anyone you may come in contact to sue. And, that's where the gray area, again, comes into play with not if you attend the event, but if you get somebody else sick that But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But that's the rationale. I hope I've explained that correctly. The implications, again, you've got the negative PR, potential lawsuit from a relative of somebody or a friend of somebody that goes. But again, how strong that is very, and potential benefits if it goes off without a hitch is some nice brand boost and some nice revenue, because you will have gate revenue again. So yeah, it's an interesting ploy. We'll see how it goes down on April 24th. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on cases in the area beforehand as well. See if they're spiking or not. But it's an interesting gamble. But that's the rationale. That's the implications. And, there you have it. All right, so the next thing I want to dive into is the UFC's parent company, Endeavor, is looking to do an IPO yet again. So if you don't remember, back in 2019, Endeavor tried to do an IPO, tried to do it at a share price of $27 per share. We're looking for, a market capitalization around $6.5 billion. Well, it was a big deal. As they got closer to the IPO date, they ended up cutting the share price because there just wasn't enough interest. during that time, you got to remember this is also around the same time as, all the WeWork stuff had happened. So WeWork had been this huge valuation, and then it turned out to be just nothing compared to what it was, and valuation just dropped. You had Peloton doing bad, Lyft not doing well. You had a bunch of IPOs that at the time, Wall Street was kind of sick of unicorns and trying to find that company where, they're in debt now and they're losing a bunch of money now, but eventually they're going to be massive and you want to get in at this moment. Wall Street had gotten tired of that in 2019. And so Endeavor didn't have the interest they needed to really take the IPO to what they wanted it to be and the share price they wanted it to be. So they pulled it last minute. And I had said when they pulled it, they would try again in a couple of years, wait for, some more interest to build back up. But that was before COVID hit and everything kind of went nuts. So it's interesting because between the time from when they first introduced the IPO to now, things have only kind of gotten worse for them outside of the UFC. So the big issue with Endeavor and why people rejected it and investors rejected it in 2019 was it's a very debt-heavy company, and a lot of its properties, because it owns things like PBC, it now owns On Location, which is an NFL, I believe it was started by the NFL for premium events. That's a newer acquisition, but it owns a lot of companies that deal with live events and, sport properties like PBC, where they weren't making a lot of money at the time. They had good revenue and looked like they would potentially make money, but none of them were actually doing extremely well, except for the UFC. The UFC was making money hand over fist and was their crown jewel, still is their crown jewel, so to speak. And that was a lot of what Endeavor placed the IPO on was, yes, like, look, we've got all these talent agents. We've got, represent a lot of amazing, powerful people all across, the globe in sports and entertainment. And we own all these, entertainment experience companies. And it ended up just not being enough for investors in 2019. In 2020, things got worse for them, right? All of their live events businesses were just destroyed. You couldn't do PBC. You couldn't do something like On Location. You couldn't do a lot of that stuff for several months. That only made things worse. Moody's, in fact, downgraded Endeavor's debt as well as the UFC's debt, even though the UFC, which is also very debt heavy, was still making plenty of revenue. They just got downgraded partially because of what was happening with Endeavor. So Endeavor's going through this trying time. They are also cutting more people, right? They had cut costs right before the pandemic, had to cut costs and talent and resources again, I believe in November. I mean, this is big. This is a big deal. So for them to file the IPO now, it's interesting for a couple reasons. One, again, because they're not doing that well. But two, is that come August 18th, any one of the partners that owns part of the UFC, which is either Silver Lake, which is the private investment firm that helped Endeavor buy the UFC, Endeavor itself, which owns 51% of the UFC, only 51%, keep in mind. They're not, some 75, 80% shareholder. They just barely have majority control of the promotion. And KKR, which is another investment firm out of the Ukraine and, Russia area and all of that, they all own pieces of the UFC based on their filings that they had to file for the IPO in 2019. Come 2021, August 18th, any one of those three can demand that the UFC is spun off into its separate IPO. So, you'll see me talking about it. You'll see John Nash has started bringing it up again, Jason Cruz and Paul Gift as well, where come August 18th, who knows, once that date hits and beyond, very well could be hearing rumors of a UFC IPO, which is another, just wrinkle in all this, because as I just said, the UFC is the crown jewel of Endeavor revenue-wise. If you take out the UFC's revenue in 2020 from Endeavor, Endeavor might be bankrupt. Or at least, a lot of their other properties are spun off, or they're in dire straits if you take the UFC out. I would wager there's a solid shot that they're bankrupt if you take away the UFC's money. So for the UFC to then have an IPO, that adds a whole bunch of complications to that, because it's possible, right, that the shares they own in the UFC then get a bunch of equity because more investors come in, and so it pumps the share price up, and it actually helps Endeavor in the long run. But it's also possible things don't go their way, and maybe the UFC price goes down, and then that hurts. It's a lot of complications to throw in when you're thinking about Endeavor itself just trying to go public. Is that, oh, by the way, its best money-making subsidiaries also could go public this year as well. I don't know. It's risky in my opinion. But then again, I'm not looking at the financials of everything. So if you could see the actual financials of the UFC and all of that, that'd be different. That I might change my tune. But from the outside looking in, looks a little bit risky. So Endeavor might be doing this to try and get their IPO out the door before the UFC IPO hits, in case things get wonky and weird and cause complications for them. I could see that as a not desperation move, so to speak, but semi-desperation move. Okay, we've got to get this out before we know that KKR or Silver Lake are going to ask for a UFC IPO. Or we want it for some reason as Endeavor. We've got to get our IPO out the door and settled first. I could see that. But even then, that's not the best position to be in, right? The other potential possibility here for why Endeavor is doing this now, especially after COVID, and COVID's lightened up some, yes, but we still don't have all 50 states open and everything back to full capacity and all of that, is that it's very possible that they know the UFC revenue is there and they've done a lot of cost cutting. We know that they've laid off a lot of staff. We know that there's been, internal cost cutting from what we've seen in the UFC. So we know those two companies are cost cutting. I'm sure if you look at, some of the other entities that Endeavor owns, there's going to be cost cutting you can find there. If they've cost cut enough that they now believe they can go to the market and say, look, we're not nearly as bad loss-wise as we were before. We've still got the UFC. Look, they're now hosting full capacity crowds, right? Tied into UFC 261. And the future is bright, because when things open up again, there's almost certainly going to be a spike in demand for travel, live events, all of that, right? It's natural. People have been cooped up in some places for a year, or if not cooped up, still limited to what they're used to. Once things, kind of go back to whatever the new normal will be, whether that's pre-COVID-19 or, mostly pre-COVID-19 or what have you, there's going to be a spike. And so it's very possible that they say, look, we're going to get a boost here from all of our stuff. And we're going to use that boost to pay down our debt. And we're going to be that unicorn we thought we were, investors in Wall Street. And it's possible Wall Street says, yeah, okay, sure, there's enough appetite here. We can go ahead and do this. It's also not taking place. The IPO is not taking place during a period of several other failed unicorns. That right there helps them too. It's not right when WeWork happened and Peloton happened and all that other stuff where it was like, oh, okay, right? It's been a couple years. So it is distanced from that era of when Wall Street essentially got sick of the IPOs and said, yeah, bye, and instead is in a different area that it might be more acceptable. I know SPACs that we've covered a little bit here are the brand new rage, but if you're thinking about it, those are still kind of IPOs. So it kind of makes sense for Endeavor to say, okay, looks like there's some appetite on the IPO market. We're going to go ahead and dive right back in. Are they still in trouble financially? Yeah, they're not in great shape, I imagine. I can't imagine they are in better financial shape than they were in 2019 other than cost cutting. Their revenue has to be much lower. Their costs are also probably better, but if they're that much better, that overall financial health is better than 2019, that would be shocking to me. So I think you've just got this perfect storm of factors with the potential UFC IPO and the fact that there will be a spike. And it's been a couple of years since the other failed IPOs of a lot of unicorn companies. And the UFC did do well during the pandemic, and they can point to those financials again and say, yes, it is strong and healthy and all that. It kind of makes sense that they're going to go ahead and pull the trigger on this. Whether or not it will be successful, we'll see. Will it get pulled again? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be very telling based on whatever roadshow they do and what Wall Street interest is. That's going to be the big thing. Because last time they did the roadshow and they looked at cutting the share price and then they had to pull. If they do the roadshow this time and it's still not a lot of, good feedback, I think maybe they pull all together, or maybe they just bite down and go for it. Because you can't just keep delaying the IPOs. They need that equity money to help pay down some of their debt, because they have debt covenants that they were already getting close to breaching in 2019, where if they broke those, the penalties were going to be real bad. Their credit was downgraded during the pandemic, so going to try and going to a bank and trying to get another huge loan, probably out of the question. They need the equity. So I think no matter what, they're probably just going to bite down and bear it. I think this time you will see an Endeavor IPO in 2021. How successful it will be, right now, I'm going to say it's not going to be great. I don't think you're getting $27 per share. I'm going to say 22 is a solid-ish target right now, and probably maybe what they'll open up at. They might try opening up at 27 and then cutting 22 if they need to, but I think that's more realistic right now. But we'll see. I don't have all the financials in front of me. I can't say, okay. Maybe they have cut enough costs and they've made enough changes. This makes sense. I can't do that right now, but expect an Endeavor IPO. And I would also, again, later in the year, expect a UFC IPO. So I think both of those are coming. But Endeavor's IPO, I would say for sure is going to happen. And right now, I don't think it's going to be where they want it to be, but whether it's where they need it to be, it is still very much up in the air. So that's what's going on with that. Endeavor IPO. There you go. All right. Last thing I want to cover real quickly here is the UFC's deal with UPShow. So UFC has partnered with Johan Promotions and UPShow to do a deal where they're now bringing UPShow and UFC content to bars and restaurants. Johan Promotions is who the UFC has, for the past 20 years, had an exclusive deal with to bring pay-per-views and whatever. If you go to Buffalo Wild Wings, right, and you saw a UFC pay-per-view, Johan Promotions was the guy, or company rather, that made the connection and did the deal to get UFC into bars and do that type of thing. UPShow is a not new company, but a new type of deal in the sense where UPShow is much more about streaming content and about trivia and things like that. So Buffalo Wild Wings is a good example, right? If you remember, I'm not sure if they still have it in all Buffalo Wild Wings or, just a couple here and there, but there used to be the trivia in Buffalo Wild Wings where you could get a little gamepad. You'd say, yeah, I want a gamepad and I want to play trivia with everybody else in the Buffalo Wild Wings. And then you would guess trivia things, you'd get points, all of that. They do that type of stuff. They also do streaming content instead of TV. So it's more of like clips from the internet. Maybe you have funny clips. If any of you have ever been in a bar with the Chive TV or heard about the Chive TV, that type of thing where they're like epic fails and crazy skater moments, what have you. It's more streaming and more internet type YouTube things rather than the traditional TV broadcasts and then just pay-per-view. They're going to be adding in some of that stuff. They'll probably have UFC specific. In fact, based on this press release, I know they'll have UFC specific content too. They'll probably do little clips, maybe show background clips from Embedded, things of that nature, right? That's what this deal is really more about, is taking UFC content and putting it in bars and restaurants, but also doing it in a more updated, modern way, similar to, the way that people have cut the cord, right? You have embedded on YouTube, you have different clips and the internet really taking over and streaming being the main thing now instead of regular broadcast television. This just kind of connects the UFC's content with a provider that does that as well. That's really what it's about. And so the packages start as low as $99. So again, you're probably looking then at highlights. You might be looking at maybe fight night things or different behind the scenes clips, and similar to what they did with Snapchat or the deals that they've done with Migu Mobile, things of that nature. You get exclusive content. That could very well happen throughout bars too. But it's not going to really affect your viewing experience if you go to a bar, unless you go to a bar or restaurant that's very UFC heavy. Then maybe the night before or the night of before the pay-per-view starts or what have you, you get kind of a UFC channel with some of that extra bonus content. But otherwise, you're still going to see the pay-per-view as is normal. And, maybe you get some UFC trivia, but it's not going to be any major shift. So this isn't oh my God, like the way once COVID ends and I'm going to go back to my favorite bar to watch my pay-per-view, it's going to be all different. Like, no, it'll probably be a little different, but nothing crazy. Pay-per-views are still going to be pay-per-views, and fight nights and extra content there might be a little bit different. But that's really what the deal is about, is just kind of modernizing a service that Johan Promotions has been providing for the UFC now for 20 years anyway. So that's just what this deal is about. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you listening and watching. I know I was delayed this week. I know it's a shorter episode. Just a lot of crazy behind the scene things going on. Still wanted to get you guys content, but not the normal episode that I was hoping to produce. But next week should be back to normal and everything's all good. But again, appreciate you on Podcast Addict, Anchor, Apple, Spotify, all that, if you're listening on any of those. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could, again, like, subscribe, hit the notification button, all of that, I'd really appreciate it. Appreciate you watching on YouTube as well. If you've got any questions or comments for me about anything I've covered today or anything you want me to cover on these, as always, let me know. And until then, my friends, get money.